Thanks for tuning in to another Farbank Fly Fishing School episode. This episode continues our exploration of the wonderful addictive world that is trout spey. In the last episode, we looked at trout spey gear, explained some of the basics of stance and grip, and had a quick dive into the key casts that a trout spey angler should know. In this episode, we take the trout spey outfits out on the water and discuss some of the most effective rigs for this style of fishing, as well as show the core fishing techniques and tactics that you should know that can be best used on the local river with these lightsabers of the spey world. Really, there's three simple ways of fishing with the trout spey outfit like this. Kind of like any other regular river fishing, you can fish streamers, you can fish dry flies, you can fish nymphs, you can fish soft hackles, you can fish hopper dropper. But in the trout spey world, particularly because of the spey cast nature, and particularly because of the change of direction that these casts are really good for, you're going to eliminate the dry fly. You're never really going to fish an upstream dry fly to a rising fish. These things are too long, they're too inaccurate, the lines aren't really good presentation lines. It's kind of hard to strip in line. So forget your dry fly and probably forget your hopper dropper type thing. So really, with the trout spey world like this, you're going to fish simply one of three easy techniques. You can fish the soft hackle. Oh yes, you can most certainly fish the soft hackle. One of the most effective ways of trout spey fishing is a couple of soft hackles. And we're going to take a look at some rigs in a moment. You can certainly fish a bunch of streamers, right? You can fish your heavy streamers on there. You can work your streamers, fish them hard, make them move, make them pulse and jerk. And again, the Trout Spey Rod outfits are very, very good for streamer fishing. And really, the other thing you can do is fish just a nymph and indicator, or a couple of nymphs and indicators. The long rods are great, great, great tools for throwing mains and getting long runs and drifts. And we're going to look at those further on in this episode. But really, at this beginning, just understand your trout spey is going to be good for soft hackles, it's going to be great for streamers, and it's great for nymphing. And what we're going to do right now is going to take a look at how to rig up the perfect soft hackle outfit. And we'll do that in the very next chapter. When you're fishing soft hackles, the soft hackles tend to be small, lighter weight flies, not a lot of weight. So when you start with your outfit, if you really want to enjoy soft hackles, the first thing you're going to start with is your rod. For me, soft hackle rods are a 1-weight trout spey or a 2-weight trout spey, probably nothing bigger. That equates to a 4-weight or a 5-weight single-handed rod. Remember the rule of 3 in the last episode? So that's how you equate that. So I like a 1-weight or 2-weight rod. That's my soft hackle rig. On the front end of that, I want to make sure I have a Scandi type line that balances it. So this is a 2-weight, perfect for a 2-weight trout spey outfit. And this is, if you remember in the last episode, we talked about the difference between a baseball and a table tennis ball. And if you didn't see that, do check out that episode because that's really important to understand the gear differences. This one is the table tennis ball. We're fishing lightweight flies, so you just want a lightweight line. So I'm going to rig up a Scandi type line on my 2-weight rod. And then on the front end of that, you do need some kind of tip. You could put a leader on, absolutely. But generally speaking, I think these things perform better with a leader. And these are sinking leaders we make at Rio called Versa leaders. My best fish catching one of all is this intermediate. This is my go-to. If I'm getting to a river, I'm always going to loop on an intermediate Versa leader to the front of that Scandi. If the sun is bright or the current is strong or I feel like I need to get down, I won't put the intermediate on, I'll put a fast sinking one on and get more depth with that. So your Versa leader is the next thing that goes onto your line. And then, like any other form of fishing, you've got to have a leader and your flies. So for me, I'm going to put on a choice of 2 types of leaders. They're both 7.5 foot. You want to keep your leaders fairly short. This is what we call the base leader. This is going to attach the Versa leader. The 3X one, that's what I use when I fish big soft hackles, or maybe there's beads or a bit of weight on them. I want a little bit stiffer, stronger leader to turn that over. But generally speaking, with kind of small soft hackles, a little bit more presentation oriented, my base leader is going to be a 4X. So that's going to go onto the Versa leader. On the front end of those 7.5 foot leaders, you do want to put on a small tippet ring. Like this. This is a trout tippet ring, a 2mm one. So I'll tie a little tippet ring onto the front end of that leader. And I'm going to show you some rigs in a second, how to rig up the best soft hackle outfit in the next chapter. This is the basic gear. So a tippet ring goes on to that 7.5 foot leader. And then from that, We want some tippet material. You either want the 4X or 5X, and a lot of that depends on fish size and fly size. If my base lead is 3X, then I'm going to tie 4X to the tippet ring. And if my base lead is 4X, I'm going to tie 5X to the tippet ring. That makes sense? So that's the basic gear you need for soft hackles. And what I'll do, I'm going to tie a few up, and in the very next chapter, we'll take a look at the rigs that I like to fish with soft hackles on a trout spey outfit. So the soft hackle rigs I use are really based on the fly size. As you can see, I've got some fairly large soft hackles up here. I've got some medium ones down here, but they actually have a tungsten bead, so they're pretty heavy. And you can see some really beady, heavy things up here. These are really heavy soft hackles. So with those soft hackles, my basic rig is going to have that 3X base leader to the tippet ring and 4X tippet off that. When you get down to these lovely little seductive monkeys here and these lovely little sow bugs down here, those are smaller flies. They don't have so much weight. They don't need such a stiff leader. So with the smaller soft hackles, that's when I have my 4X base leader, tippet ring, 5X tippet. Make sense? So that's a kind of good way of setting up. And how you rig that up, remember you've got your Scandi head on, you've got your Versa leader on, and then on the Versa leader you're putting your regular 7.5 foot leader, your base leader. And here's one I've rigged up to show you. This is the 7.5 foot 4X leader. And then hanging down from the tippet ring, I like about 8 to 10 inches of an arm. And that's my little sowbug soft hackle on there. That's really good for a dropper. And then I like about 4 foot between that tippet ring and my point fly. I'm going to bring those close together so you can see, but about 4 foot. And if you're doing 2 flies, do make sure your heavier fly or your bigger fly is on the point. That helps the casting, and your smaller fly is hanging off the dropper. As I said, about 4 or 5 feet on that. And that's a really good 2 fly rig, depending on your what you're allowed to do. Because remember, you've got to check your regulations. Unfortunately, there's some places you're not allowed to fish 2 flies. And when I'm not allowed to fish 2 flies, off that Versa leader, I'm going to just put my regular leader on there, and on that just fish a single fly. So there's nothing special about that. I think the most important rig to look at is that tandem rig with 2 soft hackles. And once you've got your gear together and know how to rig them, you need to go and fish them. So in our very next chapter, we're going to go down to the river and show you how to fish soft hackles with a 2-handed trout spey. So we're on the river. This is the Lower Madison in Montana, a beautiful river, lots of braids. This is a classic water for swinging soft hackles. The kind of water you want to look for is something like this. You've got this lovely, even poppledy, slight wavy water. The depth of water you're looking for is kind of 1 to 3 feet in depth, and that's a really ideal one. And kind of the speed, about walking speed, is ideal. What I've rigged up here is a searching outfit. And the searching outfit is I have a large fly called a Carey Special on the front end and a small little soft hackle, a sowbug soft hackle on the dropper, as we talked about in the studio on the rigs. And those things are good because they're search. You're covering a big fly and a little fly. And when you don't really know the fish are eating, that's a great rig to set up. The rig I've got here is a little 2-weight, just a beautiful little wand. I've got the little integrated Scandi we talked on. And because the water we're going to fish here is about that 1 to 3 foot depth, I've got an intermediate Versa leader on. So that's a really good setup for that kind of water. If the water's a bit deeper, say 3 to 6 feet, then all that's going to change and I'm searching is I'm going to put on a faster sinking Versa leader and keep the same searching patterns. And talking about patterns, while 2-handed rods aren't really dry fly tools because they're not very accurate and the presentation isn't good, one of the nicest things you can do fishing soft hackles is swing 2 small soft hackles through rising fish. The rising fish love grabbing them. So if you have rising fish and you feel stinted because you've got a 2-handed rod and you can't really fish a dry fly, try swinging soft hackles through them and you'll find out how many fish you can catch swinging soft hackles through rising fish. Now, when you choose your pool and you selected the depth and you selected the right outfit for it, first thing you want to do is start at the very top of the pool. You're going to work your way down the pool. So you kind of look at where the run starts and start at the top of the run and start with a short line, fairly close in. Just literally unhook the flies and make a swing with that short length of line. Then pull off a little bit more line, lengthen that, and pull off a bit more line, and pull off a bit more line, and keep pulling off line until you get to the whole of the head outside. And then start to shoot some line to get the coverage of the pool as you would. And then when you've got your comfortable range for the size of the pool, and you've got all that line length out there, then you really want to make sure you take 1 or 2 steps down after every cast. And you just work your way right down the pool doing that until you get to the tail out in the next pool, and then you decide whether to go somewhere else or change flies and go back through it again. Now, in terms of fishing, well, we covered soft tackles in a detailed episode. So if you really want to fish soft tackles and know how to go through all the information of soft tackles, check back on our previous episode, How to Fish Soft Tackles. That's going to have a lot more information about fishing the mat, the mend, the angle you fish, the tension you keep in the line. I'm not going to go into that here. Just want to give you an idea of fishing soft tackles with these two-handed rods. For me, it is my favorite way, hands down, of fishing. I love that grab. And when you do get that grab, well, generally you're going to feel it. You're going to have a fairly tight line because the current is swinging it. You're going to have the fish looking at upstream, and they come up, they swim up towards, they grab your fly, and then they turn and go downstream. So generally, you'll feel a little tug. And that's kind of what you're waiting for. You're waiting for a little tug on the end of the line. Some people, some people like to kind of drop and pause a little bit and wait for the fish to turn and grab it. I'm more of a hook setter. So if I feel a grab on the end of the line, I'm going to set the hook. And as we talked about in the previous episode when we talked about the casts, just look at the wind direction before you start and utilize the right cast according to the wind direction. And really that's it. Soft tackles are pretty easy. As I said, probably the easiest way of fishing. You get a good swing, you work your way down the pool, you cover up searching patterns, or if you have rising fish, just put on 2 small imitations of whatever's hatching, fish through those rising fish, and then you've dialed in fishing soft tackles on a trout spey outfit. And once you've got soft tackles dialed, well, then you need to look at some streamers. And we'll take a look at that in the very next chapter. Now, the outfits for streamer fishing are very different than soft tackles. If you saw the previous episode, the kind of rigging and basic setups of trout spey, you remember our little conversation about baseballs and table tennis balls. Well, this is the baseball rig. We need a rig that's going to throw heavy flies, big flies, weighted flies, and that's just not going to be your Scandi outfit, your ping pong ball. That's going to be a Skagit outfit, your baseball. And that starts off with a rod. So the standard rod I'm going to utilize this is my standard streamer outfit, a 3-weight Trout Spey rod, equates to a 6-weight if you remember that rule of 3. Skagit line on the end here, that's my baseball, that's going to throw those heavy streamers. But when I'm fishing really big streamers, I'm going to actually up this to a 4-weight and a 4-weight Skagit. So 3s and 4s are your good streamer size outfits. And on the end of that Skagit, on the end of that baseball, we want to put on an equivalent tip. So we're not going to put on those lightweight Versa leaders we talked about in the soft tackle. We're going to put on level tips like this Mo tip, this T8 tip. It's a level sinking tip. It's our baseball tip. It's got the power. It's going to cast big flies. Your Versa leaders will fail miserably with a heavier big fly. So on the front of your Skagit, you want to make sure you rig up your Mo tip. And then keeping that same theme of weight and mass and short baseball power, we're going to rig up some leaders. And generally speaking, I'm going to fish a short leader like this, about 6 foot long off the tip. This is a 16-pound one. That's good for big streamers. And this is a 12-pound one. That's probably a better call for smaller streamers, little woolly buggers and leeches and things like that. I'll probably go down to 12-pound. And then where you're allowed to, I like to fish teams of flies. I always like to fish a couple of flies, better options. So off the end of that leader, I'm going to put a tippet ring. And unlike the tippet ring we talked about in the soft tackle chapter, this is a 3mm. This is a bigger tippet ring. You have to have a bigger tippet ring because the 2mm you can't get your line through, so you can't attach it. So you want a bigger tippet ring if you're going to fish tippet rings for streamers. And really that's about it. From there, you're going to set up your rigs, and what we're going to do in the very next chapter is look at some of the streamer rigs that I utilize with the Trout Spey rod. As with the soft tackles, the streamer rigs I use are really based on the fly size that I'm fishing. I've got a selection of streamers here. These are a bigger selection of streamers. I've got some really heavy conehead dolly llamas. I've got some big, heavy weighted dumbbell eye things in here. And with big streamers like that, you've got to have your big baseball. That's going to be a completely different rig to smaller woolly bugger, leeches, kind of streamer rigs like that. So the 2 rigs that I generally want to use and kind of would recommend setting up, talked about the leaders in the previous chapter and the tippet rings. This is my big nasty 6-foot leader. And as you can see, I've tied on a 3mm tippet ring here. And this is a 16-pound big nasty leader, and I've got 12-pound hanging down from the arm. Now, I like to keep my arms a lot shorter with heavier flies. It's just easier for casting. So maybe 4 to 5 inches of the arm from the tippet ring to this black woolly bugger. 12 pound, a little bit lighter. And then maybe 2 to 3 feet of 12-pound tippet from the tippet ring to this thin mint bugger here. Those are generally smaller outfits, smaller rigs, and that's a really good streamer rig if you want to fish 2 flies that are fairly small. Now, if you're not allowed to fish 2 flies, or you just want to fish one really big streamer, you don't want to fish tandem setups. One big streamer is going to tangle. This giant thing here has got some dumbbell eyes, it's big, it's going to be harder to cast. If I have tippet rings and another fly, I'm going to constantly tangle up. So with big streamers, then go for a 1 fly. Go for a shorter leader. I've taken that same 6-foot, 16-pound leader, but I've chopped 2 feet off the front end, and my total leader length is only about 4 feet. I rig this to my sinking tip, my level mow tip, that T8 tip. I rig that to the Skagit, and I've just got this short leader. And by shortening the leader like that, I've got the weight of this fly much closer to the weight of the tip, which makes it easier to cast. And really, those are my 2 favorite rigs that I use streamer fishing. And what we need to do now is we probably need to go down to the river and take a look at how you rig a trout spey up with your streamer rig. All right, we're back on the Lower Madison, set up on this beautiful streamer run. Going to show you how to fish the streamers. The rig I've got here, just to run through what I've chosen for this run, is a 4-weight trout spey, a little stiffer than that soft tackle one. I've got a Skagit line on, not a Scandi, integrated again because we're going to do a lot of stripping. That Skagit line's got much more power, so we'll throw a bigger streamer. I've got a mow tip on. We talked about mow tips, and those are level tips that are great for streamers. They're more powerful than tapered tips. And this is what's called a 5 and 5. What it means is there's 5 foot of sinking and there's 5 foot of floating. And I've chosen that because the pool I'm going to fish here is a medium pace. It looks about 3 to 5 foot, so it's not really deep. In deeper pools or faster pools, that sink tip might be a bit longer. It might be a 7.5 foot sinking or even a 10 foot sinking, just because the current is faster or the water is deeper. And then on the end of that, I've got a short stiff leader, nice stiff leader to turn over that. I've got a big streamer on with some dumbbell eyes, nice little olive and white. I'm sure that's going to catch a fish. But there I've changed things up a little bit. You can mix your menu here, little surf and turf type thing. And on the end of that streamer, I put a little soft tackle. And the reason I've set up a soft tackle for this pool is they're fish rising. So the fish are feeding. So I've got to fish my streamer, and I'm going to fish a soft tackle. I might get some of those eaters on the soft tackle, and I might get some of those bigger fish a little deeper down on the streamer. So that's a really good rig you can set it up with. Now, streamer fishing really isn't much different from the soft tackle in terms of the approach. The kind of water you fish is maybe a little different. As I said, you want that slightly deeper water. Ideally, you want to find current seams where the current speeds change. That's an excellent area to concentrate, stripping your streamer through those seams. Find a little bit of structure, big rocks underwater, points of land jutting out, root wads, anything that just changes the flow of the water are great areas for fish to hide around and a great areas to concentrate fishing your streamers on. A little bit deeper water for sure than soft tackle. So we're looking at that 3 to 5 to 6 foot of water depth is a much better one. And a kind of, again, a medium pace. In slow water, you might have to strip a little faster, but a medium pace, kind of like that soft tackle speed we talked about, is good for swinging your streamers. And then again, just like we talked about in the soft tackle, when you've chosen that pool you're going to fish, you generally want to find the starting point, the upstream end of where you're likely to catch fish. Sneakily get into position and start short. Unhook your fly, swing it round. If you don't get a grab, lengthen by 3 feet. Lengthen by 3 feet until you get to your head out, and then strip some line off and start to boom again until you've got enough line to cover the pool and start working your way down the water, as we did with the soft tackle. And I would suggest you concentrate your time on fishing percentage water. Percentage water is really the water where you're going to find the most fish. If you're fishing a streamer and a sink tip and a big streamer, don't fish it in skinny water. You're not likely to get a big brown in there or a big streamer eating fish in there. Don't fish it in really slow flats unless you can strip it really fast and move it. So fish your percentage water. And when you're fishing streamers, you're going to know when you get a take because the line is going to lock up. A lot of people fish streamers because they love that eat. And so when you're stripping the streamer or swinging the streamer, you get this big bang on the end of the line. And that, the tug is the drug, is a great thing to think about. Wait till you feel and then set the hook. And I'm not going to go into real depth about how to fish streamers. We did that in another episode. If you want to really delve into all the techniques of fishing streamers, check back at our previous episode, How to Fish Streamers. You get a lot more information in that than you will here. But that is with a one-handed rod. And with the two-handed rod, there's not a lot of difference, but I want to run through a couple of really key techniques. One, just like the soft tackle, cast your line out, swing it around. In slow water, cast a little bit squarer. In fast water, cast a little bit finer. Maybe put a mend in, maybe don't. The second thing you should do is move the fly, strip the fly. Especially if a streamer's got a leaded head like this, the lead head drops. So every time you pull the fly, it pulls up. And if you pause for slightly, it'll drop down again. So you get this lovely jinxing action in the water. So stripping a streamer can be very, very effective in the water. And when you're stripping a streamer, don't be plain Jane or boring Bill and just have this monotonous strip all the way in. It's ineffective. You will not catch a lot of fish doing that. Your best way of fishing streamers is throw the line out, do a nice little mend, a little bit of slack in the line lets the sink tip in that streamer sink, and then as it swings around, strip it in, but change your strip up. Sometimes do short strips, sometimes do long strips, sometimes quick strips, sometimes slow strips, and a lot of the time, pause. The pause is wonderful because when you strip, that weighted fly pulls up, and when you pause, weighted fly drops down. So pause gives so much life to a streamer. So thoroughly recommend it. It's great with a two-handed rod as long as the rod is powerful enough to throw those bigger streamers, as long as the line's powerful enough to throw those bigger streamers and the tip is powerful enough. It's a pretty easy technique. Just get in the pool, fish the percentage water, work your streamer, don't be plain Jane, keep it changing it up, and you'll have a lot of success fishing streamers with a Trout Spey rod. And once you've got the hang of fishing streamers and you fish soft tackles and maybe you're not catching fish, well, there's one other really good technique of fishing with a two-handed trout spey, and that is nymphing. We're going to take a look at that in the very next chapter. When nymphing with these outfits, well, nymphing, first of all, is very, very successful just because the long rod, great for men's, great for controlling, great for feeding a lot of line. So very, very useful way of nymph fishing is with these two-handed rods. And my choice is going to really be based on fly size and indicator size. And we'll talk about that here. My standard one's going to be a 3-weight or a 2-weight, something light, little Scandi line, that table tennis ball. If I'm fishing copper johns and little basis patterns and nymphs that are sort of 16s, 18s, and I'm fishing fairly small indicators, then this is the perfect outfit. But if you're fishing really heavy nymphs, big stonefly patterns, there's a lot more weight in that. Or maybe you're fishing indicators that are really large, like this thing here. This is a huge indicator. That's going to be really hard to cast on a Scandi and on a 2-weight or a 3-weight. So in those situations, I'll probably step up to a 3-weight outfit or maybe a 4-weight outfit like this, and I will most certainly put on a Skagit line. That Skagit line is your baseball. That baseball is going to move that indicator so much better as a result. But remember one thing, right? Skagit heads do need a tip put on the front end. And we've talked about in the previous episode using sinking tips with the streamers. Well, in this one, you can't use a sink tip because you've got an indicator. So the tip you put on your Skagit line for big indicators should be something like this. This is still the Mo tip, but it's a floating Mo tip. That means your indicator stays up on the water. So if you're going to fish big indicators or really big stonefly patterns, big heavy nymphs, go to your Skagit, 3 or 4 weight, put on a floating Mo tip. But generally speaking, I think for most people who nymph, you're going to fish the smaller nymph patterns, and those smaller nymph patterns don't need those heavy lines. You can get your Scandi, and then on the Scandi, you're just going to rig your regular leader, 9-foot 4X, for example, something like that, straight off the Scandi. I love tippet ring, so I'm going to put a tippet ring on here, and then whatever my overhang is between the indicator and the tippet ring, well, that's going to be based on the water height, as we'll see in the next chapter. But my basic rig is going to be a 9-foot 4X leader, a little bit of a tippet ring, and then some tippet that goes on the front end of that. And that's kind of ideal for those smaller nymphs. And how you put that together? Well, we're going to take a look at that in the very next chapter. There's 3 rigs I like to use when nymphing with a Trout Spey outfit. They're all like single-handed outfits. There's no real difference in the single-handed outfits, but the choice of gear, as we talked about just now, is important. My standard rig is going to be 2-fly rig, where you're allowed, off that 2mm dropper, hanging down about 8 inches, 5X, small flies, little copper john, red copper john hanging down there, about a 6 to 8 inch dropper there, and then maybe about 3 feet to the point fly, little Prince Nymph that I've got on here. But that gap does depend on the water depth, so in deeper water I'll probably put those two flies further apart, or maybe keep the flies further up close together, but move my indicator further up. The choice of length between indicator and point fly is really the depth of the water. 5 foot of water, you want that to be about 5 feet from that indicator to the fly. So where you like 2 flies is allowed, that's a great rig for 2 flies. As we talked about in that previous chapter, sometimes you're going to fish big nymphs. This is a big stonefly pattern here. It's got a bead on, it's got lead underneath, it's going to be heavy to cast. A, because it's heavy to cast, and B, because a heavy fly requires a much bigger indicator to hold it up. So I'm going to fish an indicator this size on that heavy nymph. And all of that means that that rig, as we talked about in that previous chapter, is going to be a Skagit outfit and your floating mow tips. And really one other one where you're only allowed to fish a single fly and you need to get down and you like to fish small flies because the fish are feeding on tiny little betas or midge patterns. Another rig that's really useful to have is going to be the single fly rig, but about a foot from that single fly, you can see I've crimped on a small split shot. That split shot will take the fly down quite nicely to the depth of the fish. I can fish a small fly and get down there and the shot is taking me down. And again, I like to rig whatever water depth it is. So it's 2 feet, I'm going to go 2 feet from that indicator down to the split shot. So those are the 3 nymphing outfits that you can utilize with your Trout Spey rig. So now what we need to do is look at how to do that. And we're going to go down to the river and take a look at how to fish nymphs with a Trout Spey in your very next chapter. Here we are, back on the lower Madison again. About to show you how to fish nymphs. Lovely little pool here. There's a good seam. There's a nice little bit of a drop off. So it's a classic nymphing water. The rig I've chosen here, little 3-weight Trout Spey. I've got a Scandi integrated line on there, but I haven't put any tips on or any Versa leaders because I want a really short head. And the reason I want a short head is there's going to be a lot of feeding of running line. One of the great attributes of these spey type lines is that running line is super thin, so it allows for a lot of feeding of line when you want to create a really long drift. So I've got no tip on there. I've got a leader about 6-7 feet to an indicator, and then about 6 feet from the indicator to a heavy fly. That's because the water looks to be about 4 to 6 feet in deep. And then just behind the heavy fly, I've got a little zebra midge that is maybe a foot behind it. So that's my rig. Now, if I had a different indicator, like a really big indicator like this, then I'll probably turn onto a Skagit head because I need a heavier head to turn to big indicators and big kind of salmon fly, stonefly nymphs. Flies that size need a big indicator. Big indicators need a heavier line. So with heavy flies and indicators, go to your Skagit, but generally speaking, just put on a Scandi, no tip on there, just a regular 7.5 foot 2X or 3X leader to the first fly. That's the gear. In terms of what you're looking for, well, you're looking for some just classic water. You're looking for drop-offs. Always drop-offs are very good to run nymphs down. You're looking for inside seams, current changes, or slow water in the inside behind a protected boulder or something like that. So you're looking for just good fish catching water where fish will hold. You don't want too fast a water because it's just so complicated to get heavy enough flies to go down in really, really fast water. And generally you don't want slow, glassy water. You want water with changes of current speed. You want changes with water with bubble lines are really good because the bubble lines focus the current and that focuses the food, which is where the fish tend to lie. So all those are good areas to fish and what you're looking for when you're fishing nymphing, whether a two-handed rod or a one-handed rod. We're talking in this episode about the two-handed rod, the Trout Spey, and as I said, this is my 3-weight. This is a 11-foot 3-weight. One huge undervalued advantage with the Trout Spey rods is physically the length of the rods. They are such long levers, they can hold off a huge amount of line off the water. And that is really good when you're fishing across different currents and you want to control the drift of your fly down a particular seam, but there's an awkward current between you and that seam. Well, these long rods can hold up so much more line and allow you to control the fly better. So long two-handed Trout Spey rods really do give you a big advantage when you're nymph fishing, especially when you're fishing and you want to create very long drifts. Now, when you're fishing nymphs, the eats are fairly obvious. You're going to watch an indicator and you're going to watch it floating down. And really what you're trying to do is create very long drifts. So your casts are going to be generally upstream. You might throw a little mend in there and watch your indicator, it goes down. And as I said just now, this thin running line is so easy to feed and shoot slack. You can create very long, like 40, 50, 60, 70-foot drifts by feeding that. And really the only detriment is when this thing becomes too far away for you to see. So you can get very long drifts with this setup. As I said, very good setup for catching the fish and for nymphing seams. And really, when you fish nymphs, as I said, all you want to do is study the water. Unlike the streamer and the soft hackle where you're going to start at the top and fish your way right through to the bottom, you're going to cherry pick. You're going to fish the percentage water. You're going to find the bubble lines and you'll fish those bubble lines 6 or 8 or 10 casts. Maybe change nymph, but stay in that bubble line rather than move. Or you might find a seam or a drop off and you nymph that 6 or 8 times. Maybe change your fly. And if you don't get any fish, then go to a different spot. So it's a slightly different technique. And again, we're not going to go into all the variations and the various ways of fishing nymphs. If you want to see that, go back to our previous chapter on how to fish nymphs. Again, it's a one-handed chapter, but all the information is relevant. Just want to show you how to do it with the two-handed rods, utilizing this super thin running line and this extra long rod. And really, that's it. So your Trout Spey stuff is a great game. You can fish your soft tackles and swing. You can fish swing and strip streamers, and you can certainly get some very long drifts with nymphs. And once you got the hang of it, you can call yourself a two-handed trout angler. So there you have it, Trout Spey in a 2-episode nutshell. I hope you've enjoyed our mini-series and it has inspired you and given you the confidence to get one of these marvelous little two-handed rods and start the journey to a more effective, more efficient, and a much more fun way of fly fishing for trout in a river. As always, I want to end this episode with a friendly reminder to do your part in keeping the river clean and the fish healthy. Look after the environment, leave no trace of your visit to the water, and treat the fish you catch with the utmost respect. Thanks a lot for watching this episode, and I hope to see you on the river one day, putting the newfound Trout Spey skills to great use.